12 years ago, thousands of Americans, both blacks and whites, gathered in Washington to demand freedom, justice, and equality. A few years later, of course, the murder of Dr. King confirmed what most people had feared, that nonviolent protest alone could never make black Americans free. The changes that came out of the civil rights struggle proved to be mostly cosmetic. A few people got some new jobs. Now at Interface, we thought that there was more to it than that. So in the following report, we asked 3 veteran civil rights workers what the legacy of the civil rights struggle really was. I'm Tony Batten. This is Interface.
We people who are darker than blue, are we gonna stand around this town and let what others say come true? We're just good for nothing, they all figure. A boyish grown-up shiftless jigger. Now we can't hardly stand for that. Or is that really where it's at? We people who are darker than blue, this ain't no time for segregating. I'm talking about brown and yellow too. Hi, yellow girl, can you tell? You're just the surface of our dark, deep well. If your mind could really see, you know your color is same as me. Pardon me, brother, as you stand in your glory. I know you won't mind if I tell the whole story.
Significance of the civil rights movement was that it took people who really didn't think of themselves as being anything and helped them to realize that they were somebody, that they were children of God, that they were full citizens of this society, that as the Declaration of Independence says, all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And I think when people came to that sense of themselves, they began to realize that they ought to have the right to vote, that they ought to have a right to a decent education, that the problems they were facing were some things that they could do something about. And so we organized and we registered to vote, and now we find ourselves in key positions of political power and influence from one end of this country to the other.
The two barriers that we must break right now are political barriers, and last of all, the economic barrier. Before the Civil Rights Act will really mean anything to us. For example, we thought that Brown versus Board of Education would bring about automatic integration in American society. It simply did not happen. We now know that racism is so much ingrained in American society that even the Supreme Court saying that it ought not be, even Jesus saying that it ought not be, has not changed the minds of many persons in this society. Racism is rampant today.
I think that economic factor is a very big factor in appraising what the major problems are today. Out of it grows, well, we can talk about crime. Out of it also grows the increased frustration of living in a culture that says you can be a success, you can make it, and that gives you little or no opportunity to do so.
Ella Baker, a veteran civil rights worker from North Carolina, has lived in New York City for many years. She is symbolic of the less publicly celebrated heroes of the civil rights movement who have made great contributions to the efforts of the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the South. Despite these efforts, the legal and moral victories won by the movement in the 50s and 60s have made very little difference in the lives of black people in her neighborhood here in Harlem. Ms. Baker's experiences in the movement over the years have strengthened her belief that the political and economic system must change before the goals of the movement can be effectively realized. King advocated nonviolence as a way to bring about these changes, but even then, some people questioned the tactic of peaceful protest.
Well, I think certainly the death of King, and maybe even before he died, there must have been a reassessment of nonviolence in terms of the extent to which it could produce fundamental and lasting change. I personally wasn't quite as able to sit and let somebody burn a cigarette on the back of my neck, but I've seen very strong and robust young men sit and be pummeled and yet not resist. And I know they did it largely because this was what they conceived of as being the tactic that they could get the kind of results for which they were working. See, I don't feel very grateful for that which ought to have been done, and certainly not grateful for that which people do under great pressure. Now, I know that realistically, as some of the outstanding leaders might say, realistically, you can't expect these things to change, as they say, overnight. But it hasn't been overnight.
To some people, Atlanta symbolizes the New South. Its affluent black middle class and the presence of many liberal whites distinguishes Atlanta from other cities in the South. The first headquarters of Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference was here. And now, so is his grave, a monument to the unfulfilled dreams of black people. As executive vice president of SCLC, Andrew Young was actively involved in voter registration projects during the early 1960s. Today, Congressman Young represents Atlanta's 5th District, which incorporates the diverse interests of poor blacks in Vine City, the students at Atlanta University Center, and the more affluent residents of Collier Heights. Young believes that he can represent each community without neglecting the needs of the others.
black needs and white needs are really not too different now. That the problems that this society faces are problems that all people face. And I think what I've tried to do is almost totally deracialize the problems. I say that when a society has problems, the people who are the first ones to suffer from those problems are blacks. But 2 years later, whites are suffering from those same problems. In the case of the drug situation, blacks began to suffer first. But it wasn't long before middle-class whites began to suffer the same problems. Blacks began to complain about the problems of public education. But those same problems affect whites. Blacks have always had a hard time getting health care. But now whites are complaining that they need a national health insurance of some sort. So really there's no contradiction between representing the needs of the black community and representing the needs of the total American situation. Because the problems that black folk are suffering from today, white folk will be suffering from tomorrow.
People like yourself who have called for political coalitions between the white poor and the black people have always been crushed either by governmental forces or by those groups that would really like to see blacks and whites kept separate. It certainly happened to Dr. King. Don't you sometimes feel afraid about that and alone?
Well, I guess I don't, because one of the things that's also happened since the 60s is that a good portion of white America has waken up. That the white students who were with us in the movement went back to their campuses and organized the opposition to the war in Vietnam. Many of those same people organized the women's movement and later the consumer movement along with Ralph Nader. And you have a more sophisticated middle America now. So we have, in a sense, a bigger majority of the people of goodwill. And those happen to be the children of the power elite. And so in those very same families that were afraid of Martin, now they have a tendency to see that somebody has got to come along to help reconcile the tensions between race and class in this society. And they're almost grateful to see somebody trying.
Soul City. Here in eastern North Carolina, Floyd McKissick, a former executive director of CORE, is also trying to make the system work for blacks. McKissick began to develop Soul City in 1968 on the site of an old plantation. He sees Soul City as an alternative to other cities and towns where economic and political problems continue to beset blacks. Financed almost entirely by government loans and grants secured from the Nixon administration, Soul City has been in the planning stages for 6 years. Undaunted by skeptics, McKissick qualifies his position when asked if Soul City is his example of black self-determination.
I think that, see, I'm an integrationist. I believe that all people are equal. I believe that in order to make a system respond to minorities, that we have to have far more power.
Were you always an integrationist? At a certain point, I think you changed from being an integrationist to an advocate more of black power, black individual effort apart from the mainstream. Isn't that so?
Well, no, it's not so. And I think that this is, a lot of folk have said, look, at one time you were advocating Swahili in the public schools of New York. Mm-hmm. True. I'm a cultural nationalist in the sense that I don't think that we ought to deny who we are. Mm-hmm. And I think Tony, our paths go back to the Oakland Convention, CORE, where we are talking about it's time for blacks to quit being ashamed of who they are. Quit saying that they're Negroes. Say that you're black. Be proud of who you are. Mm-hmm. But don't cop out on the American scene, because our power in the United States is a great source of help to moving and developing power in Africa.
If you say that, then why would you go to a governmental administration whose history was repressive toward black people. And why did you go to them rather than going to, say, let's say, some African nation, Tanzania or Ghana, to request the kind of funds that you did and needed to get Soul City started?
This country is the most powerful nation in the world. And we had better recognize that no need of going to Africa. We built this country by our own blood, sweat, and tears. There was 13 original colonies and basically a slave economy where our parents and forefathers made this country what it was by virtue of free labor. And I'm not about to cop out on it and go to Africa.
Yeah, but when you talk about emerging political strength, you talk about the emerging political strength of black people, you supported Richard Nixon.
Correct.
That shocked a lot of people. Why'd you do that?
I supported Richard Nixon for the simple reason that I was supporting a doctrine of the two-party system. Whoever's president, we are going to have to negotiate with. We're going to have to get along with. The fact that if it had been Tom Brown president, John Smith president, George Wallace president, or anybody else, we are going to have to learn how to deal with whoever is president by virtue of the office and not necessarily the man. Somebody said, well, you're already cracking the political barrier. Look at all the mayors you got. No, that's evidence of political power. But, for example, who wants to be mayor of a bankrupt city? Is this not another thing that they're passing on to us with many problems that we can't solve? Who is it that's going to have to call in the stormtroopers the next time the brothers get out of line? It's going to be the mayors. So we have got to really look at what real political power is and a correlation between power, money, economics, and land. And that means that the battles that we fought in the 60s, while many of the barriers could be broken with demonstrations, the barriers in the 70s are going to require you to go to school and get some master's degrees in banking, finance, accounting, land planning, municipal government. And this is the area that we've got to move in if we really want the black power that we talked about. You can't talk about what time is it, nation time, and you don't own no land, you see. You've got to now realize that when you own a mass of land, you bringing people on that land, you bringing on registered voters, and they can determine how they advance in that society. And that's a part of what Soul City is all about.
Would you say that we're taking maybe one step forward and two steps backward when varieties of black political representatives begin to say things like they want to support Richard Nixon, or they can even consider supporting someone like George Wallace? I mean, how do you explain that kind of thinking?
Well, I think we've always had a certain degree of black opportunism. And that's not altogether bad. I think there are some people who legitimately involve themselves with people that they know are their enemies in the long run for a short-term self-interest gain. Now, if it's the interest of the total community that they're concerned about, I would say even though I don't want to do it, I wouldn't condemn them. If they're simply tying up with somebody to line their own pockets, then we have to accept the fact that even in the movement, back in Montgomery days, there was a black preacher who joined the John Birch Society and went around the country talking about Martin Luther King being a communist just to get money. That's a black hustler. We've had them all through history. We probably will continue to have them. But not everybody that tries to work along with whites, even conservative whites, is necessarily hustling.
One of the concerns I have in terms of some of the public articulation now about the number of representatives that we have in Congress and elected black officials, I'm afraid we get caught in a kind of dream state of thinking that that in itself is going to produce results that are far-reaching. But it isn't true, because I think we had almost, if not the same number, an equal number of representatives in Congress following in the Reconstruction period. We also had people in elected offices in the state, and these were people who came out of slavery and were elected. And yet, you see what took place.
You've been working in the movement, the struggle for civil liberties, for human rights, for over 40 years, just here in New York. If you had it to do all over again, would you? And do you think that it's been worth it all?
I would do it over, because I don't think I could be any different once I had learned that lesson, that unless there is a change in the economic relationships between the haves and the have-nots, and the power relationships of those who are in control as over against those who have no control. Unless there's a basic change there, there can be no basic security for those who have not. And I'm always a part of the have-nots. I think I'd have to be.
In 1954, a Supreme Court decision ruled out school segregation in America. But now, 20 years later, that ruling is still difficult to enforce, as we shall see in a future interface program on the Boston school situation. But there were important changes that came out of the civil rights struggle. The number of blacks in the political scene in Washington increased. New black congressmen brought with them wives and families who were confronted by new pressures and new demands. In a profile of Roscoe Dellums, wife of California Democratic Congressman Ron Dellums, producer Audrine Ballard examines the pressures on a political wife in Washington.
There was a time, in order for a man to seek public office, that he would have to have a family intact. That spoke to, what did it show? How stable he was, you know. He had to have a church that he was affiliated with. He had to have a wife, some children, a pet, you know, all that, right? Mm-hmm. And people, you know, would only vote for you if you fit whatever that image was, that kind of thing. So many times, I'm sure there were some bad marriages. They just sort of hung together because of that. There have been people who have separated and divorced and who have gotten reelected, mm-hmm. you know. So now people are sort of saying, well, maybe we don't have to play this game anymore. Being a political wife, I've known some of the fear about this change.
On Capitol Hill, where politics, socializing, and rumor are wedded, affairs like this are a necessary component in the mix. Her husband was ill when Ms. Dellums attended the Senate reception honoring world heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali.
Generally, anytime a person such as Muhammad Ali, anyone who's black or whose politics are similar to mine, or someone whose cause I believe in, I will make an attempt to get to that kind of reception. I've really made an effort to sort of make up for Ron's absence. I've been married to Ron, going on 13 years. And anytime Ron has ever gotten involved in something, he got involved in it, you know, it was time-consuming and that sort of thing. So in terms of the time being spent away from home and the family, you know, those kind of sacrifices, I mean, that's been happening a long time ago. Washington was not the beginning of that sort of thing.
Her own involvement with political and social groups seems to demand an enormous amount of time. At Interface, we wondered how satisfied she was with this round of activities and how she felt they affected time spent with her children.
Well, we made up our minds, I think, a long time ago that we were going to be friends. And once that happened, everything else became a little easier. They, number one, understand that I'm a person and that there are things that I have to do outside of this house. And this does not mean that I'm deserting them. That's just the kind of life that I have selected. They know that they have priority in my life, and that that if I leave this house, they know how to reach me. They can probably reach me quicker than my husband can reach me. I come from a family of 6 girls, right? And I'm number 2, and I was to be my father's son. So I was named in advance of my birth. And there was sort of a debate, was I going to be Leo Jr. or was I going to be Roscoe? And the name Roscoe caught on. My mother, when she was carrying me, everyone would refer to me as Roscoe. I mean, I respect what my mother was all about, what she was trying to do. She thought it was very important that I was cultured, because if I was cultured, then white people, when I came in contact with white people, we would have something in common. And most of the energy at the time when I was being raised was to make me acceptable to, you know, the dominant society. Like, I don't care about that anymore. I want to be acceptable to myself. That's important. People have to take me the way I am. Music has always been sort of part of my life. My mother was a pianist, and all of us, that means my sisters and myself, were introduced to music rather early. Played at the piano. I never played it well. I never accomplished that instrument. Played the cello, dancing, all those kinds of things.
Sweetheart, I can sing of the joy our love will bring. Brought me the...
She is fascinated by show business, admits to being starstruck, hugely admires comedian Carol Burnett. Despite teaching credentials in special education and a degree in sociology, Roscoe Dellums feels her professional life is full of starts and stops and small dissatisfactions. She wants, she says, to pursue something all the way through to the end, and currently, her interests and energies are focused on a songwriting career. She is assisted in this by composer-pianist Bill Joyner, and on occasions by DC vocal talent.
I am like in my third decade of life, right? At a very important time, in the sense that I have far more information now than I've ever had before about life. And I've become very, very serious about life. Like I find myself waking up and I'm still saying, what am I going to be when I grow up? I don't have to feel guilty about wanting my own life, separate from my husband, separate from my children. I mean, it rests right with me when I say, there's some things I want to pursue. They might take me away from home, They might be frowned upon in terms of other people's expectations, other people's values. I don't take my direction from the existing feminists that are out there. I mean, I don't believe that white women are in a position to sort of like dictate to me what my self-interest is. I mean, I don't want to be involved in anything that I see as an anachronism just because women are running it. There's never been what I would call a real honest dialogue between white women and black women. We've never gotten over our feelings about each other.
Complex elements of contradiction, conflict, and a certain artful compromise are basic ingredients in the social and political community of Capitol Hill. This was a small part of Roscoe Dellums' Washington. There is much business in it and little private time. There is also a sense of search and quest.
Sometimes I really miss the kind of sharing that Ron and I had in the beginning of our relationship. I miss sometimes having an adult to relate to. But I have learned really to become a friend to myself, and that has taken some time. I think loneliness has become sort of a constant companion, so it's become sort of a friend now because it's made me more explorative, and it's helped me to mature.
Roscoe Dellums, a woman who is trying to find an identity that can withstand the pressures of being a political wife. Next week, a different kind of profile on a very different kind of religious figure. Join us for a celebration with San Francisco's controversial minister, Reverend Cecil Williams. That's next time on Interface. I'm Tony Batten. See you here.
I woke up this morning with my mind was set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, Lord, set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm walking and talking with my mind. It was set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind, Lord. Set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind. Set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.